Welcome to the Sustainable Travel Podcast. I'm Emma, your host from That Travel. This is a podcast that interviews a range of different travelers from different backgrounds to see what sustainable travel means to them. And today I am here with Alexa Pavan from Go Green with Alexa. Alexa is an imperfect sustainability advocate, a low waste traveler, and small space garden enthusiast. And today we're going to be talking all about low waste and zero waste travel, why it matters and how you can do it. And I'm super excited. Hi, Alexa.
Hi, Emma. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited.
No problem. I'm zero waste for those who don't know, or low waste, I guess we should say. And I don't know that many people who are, so I'm quite excited to chat with you finally. I feel like it's been a long time coming.
Yeah, I've been enjoying your podcast, so I can't wait to finally be on it.
Yeah, good. And so tell us about you then and how you got into sustainability and everything that you do.
Yeah, so I think my journey is a little different than most, but I think it adds a different perspective.
Mhm.
So I grew up in a sustainable family, I guess I would call it that now. At the time when I was growing up, I didn't realize it was. Um, I'm based in the United States, and my parents are immigrants from Brazil. And growing up with their Brazilians are very nature focused, and my
Yeah,
family is very nature focused. My mom grew up on a farm. My dad grew up like diving off the coast of Brazil.
yeah.
So they just naturally had this passion for nature and experience with it themselves, and naturally wove that into our life. So I
Mhm.
grew up composting, and my parents always grew like tropical fruit trees. I'm based in Florida, so we have like a year-round growing season, and they also owned a scuba diving business for all of my life until recently in 2019.
Wow.
So yeah, that combination of ocean conservation plus like the gardening and composting really opened my eyes to the differences between me and
Yeah.
my counterparts. Yeah, because like it's not really common, at
No,
least,
it's not common at all. Like,
yeah.
I'm thinking because I know you're going to go on, but like, you may be the only person that I know who has actually had that from a young age and not just like revolutionized on their own.
Yeah, and I mean, it was a journey still because I didn't realize how different things were. My parents had a small trash can to this day. They still have a small trash can under their sink, and like I'm talking about tiny, like and when I went to my American friends' houses, they always had the giant trash can. And I was like, I
Yeah.
remember like not, like as a child, you don't really think about waste like that. But I remember being like, that's so strange. Like, why do they need such a big trash can? And, not putting two and two together about the composting we did and also being very mindful of our waste to begin with. My mom would always keep the jars, and I kind of made fun of her back then for that, even though that's something I do now. So it's like things that like I might have been like, oh, that's a drag, or
Yeah.
that's weird. I've come to love and appreciate. So it wasn't until I went to college that I was like, wow, like I was preparing a lot of my own food, like, all of it. And I was just throwing so much of the scraps away. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is breaking my heart.
Yeah.
What can I do? And I lived in an apartment with three other, roommates. So it was like, how can I accomplish something like composting when I don't have a home, like a
Yeah.
house with a backyard. And so like I got a vermicomposter where I had my worm box inside, and my roommates were like, "What are you doing? This is so strange." But like I was like, just wait and see. So that was just like another entry point of my life where I was like, okay, this really matters to me. And I also have a degree in public health, and we learned a lot about environmentalism in public health and how what I love about public health is that it's all connected, basically like explaining how our health is not just, our food and our healthcare systems, but it's more like our community and our access to food is political and all these different elements that all are kind of infused. And that's how I see sustainability is that
Yeah.
it's really, it's multifaceted and it affects every part of our lives, or it could be infused into every part of our life. So I just started just drawing all these connections. And I think it's that combination of growing up in a sustainable family, then having that university education, and now putting into practice in my own adulthood, where I've kind of got so into it. And I was already doing all these things that I thought, well, maybe I should just start posting about it
Yeah.
online, you know?
That's so cool. Like a few things to say to that. So firstly, my best friend is the child of an immigrant in the UK. Well, the child of two immigrants in the UK. And she has a very similar story that like out of I don't know, necessity, like I guess money or just practice, they were very sustainable. So she used to tell me because we went to university together, oh, my mum makes her own yogurt and she like makes her own bread and stuff. And I was like, oh, wow, that's like so, like at the time I was thinking, wow, that's like really rustic kind of thing. Like, does she live in the countryside? And like now with my understanding, I make my own yogurt and I'm like, that's super cool. Like, more people should do that. And it's funny how we kind of draw on these older techniques or these techniques of necessity from individuals who like really needed to do this, and now we're like trying to do it.
Absolutely. And like you said, my parents were very frugal and my mom knew really how to stretch a dollar and also how to make a ton of things. So she always made her own bread, her own yogurt too. It was more like a kefir, I would say, because it's more liquidy. But she made all kinds of things and things that you typically wouldn't think to make.
Mhm.
So it was very much like homemade, but it's because you can really stretch that, right?
Yeah,
And that's why another reason why I love sustainability is because although it's great for the environment. There's so many benefits, but there's also the benefit of saving money
yeah.
and being so mindful and kind of like slowing down.
Mm.
And like you said, going back to those older practices that are, I don't know, we probably shouldn't have abandoned in the first place.
Yeah, we shouldn't have. And I also think it makes you more resourceful because you're learning these skills that are like basic survival instincts in some cases, like how to make your own food and bread. Like we've been doing this for millennia. We shouldn't give that up so easily.
Yeah, and isn't it crazy? I kind of talk about this with my partner all the time, but like we were farmers for thousands of years, and how did we let two generations pass where we weren't, we moved to industrialization, and now farming is not part of the daily life anymore. It's just
Yeah.
crazy that it can happen so quickly.
Hmm.
So I'm really glad that there's like a movement of going back to being resourceful, like you mentioned. And yeah, I like to think of myself as very scrappy. Like I can make anything work with whatever. And
Yeah.
I think that has shown to be valuable in my life.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I mean, honestly, I don't know that many people who are zero waste or low waste. And I don't know anybody who's kind of come to it through their parents, except for my best friend, as I said, but she's a bit different. She's not quite into sustainability in the same way. And I think it's super interesting because my grandma, I guess, is a little bit like what you mentioned. Like she keeps like all her tins and like her biscuit boxes and like she'll be pulling things out of cupboards like and almost like hoarding, I would say, but I don't say that to her. And then my parents are the opposite. So they're very much like they show their love through buying things. So they're very much like, I got you this, I got you that. And even when I started to get into sustainability, they were kind of like, what do I get you now? Like, what can
Mhm.
I buy you? And I'm like, no, no, like, I don't want anything. I actually want you to reduce what you buy. And it was really hard. Like, they just couldn't get their head around that. I don't know if you've ever experienced that kind of thing with people you know.
Absolutely. A lot of people, I think, especially as I get more into it, I've always kind of just been more of like I want something that I can use type of
Yeah.
person. And I don't want to tell people what to get me, but more often than not nowadays, I say, please don't get me anything, or
Yeah.
maybe an experience we could do together. That's what I prefer.
Mhm.
Like to me, that's way more valuable, and I'll remember it and cherish it more than I would something that I probably won't use.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I just feel like it does make people uncomfortable because
It does.
they don't know what to do with that, right?
Mm.
And I just tell them that it's totally okay. Honestly, a lot of the time too, I say if you could donate to my favorite organization, I would be so over the moon. So something like that, I think, just giving people ideas and options.
Yeah.
But I
I
get
think
that it's
that's a good
weird
idea.
or weird.
Yeah, I know I'm the weirdo in my family completely, and I've just embraced it. I'm like, whatever. But with my family, what I tend to do is ask them like, so what do you want for Christmas, or what do you want for your birthday? And then I guess when they have that like permission from me, they'll be like, oh, well, what do you want? Like, can I, and then it makes it a lot easier for them, as you say, because they have this almost like they can deal with that when they know.
Yes, a guideline.
Yeah, a guideline for sure. So we've like dropped a few hints about zero waste, low waste, whatever. But there might be a few people listening who aren't necessarily 100% clear on the term or just haven't even heard it before. So can we explain what is it? Like what's zero waste and what's low waste? What do they mean?
Yeah, there's actually an official definition. I was just at a zero waste forum the other day, and they were saying that there's been a codified official definition, like a global definition.
Cool.
I don't have it on hand, but I guess I want to just first specify that I I have nothing against the term zero waste. I
Yeah.
guess I just worry sometimes I get worried that because I feel like my content, I really try to focus on people who don't consider themselves to be sustainable,
Yeah.
or maybe people who like love nature but like don't see the connection between humans and nature and like what we do and how that affects nature. And I think that's like the gateway I try to get people to go through, like, oh, you love nature, so let's protect it, right? And let's
Mhm.
use our actions and our voice to protect nature. So with that, I think that I just try to bring the language down to more like accessible language, so then it's less, I don't know, like less scary, I guess.
Yes,
I don't want people to
absolutely.
like, yeah, I don't want people to think zero waste and be like, oh, I have to make no waste or something like that. Even though the definition is very, I would say, expansive rather than reductionist. Like,
Mm.
rather than, focusing on what you're trying to eliminate. I think maybe you'd have a probably better definition for zero waste, but
No, well, I know what you mean because so for me, like I really like the term zero waste because I am so competitive and I'm like
I love that.
I'm like yes, zero, like well, let's do it. But then I know what you mean, and we haven't even like defined it. We're just going
I
into
know.
semantics and like trying not to trip over our toes. But like I think that the term low waste is sometimes more accessible and less frightening.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that when we're talking, so the definition I heard for zero waste was send nothing to landfill, which we currently do. So I like to think that we are zero waste. But we're not one of those households that will like, when you see those, it was so funny. You used to see those like Instagram posts of people who are like, here is all the waste I've produced in the last 5 years, and it would be this tiny jar. And I'm like, that's ridiculous. Like, that's
Yeah,
not possible. And it's unrealistic. And it makes people think that they can't even do things like recycle. So
exactly.
yeah. So go on, you can finish from there.
Yeah, so I mean, basically what you said, like we still produce waste, right? But it's very limited and mindfully. And I think what at least I try to do is repurpose a lot of it.
Yeah.
Um, and like you mentioned, use the systems that already exist, like recycling and composting and things like that. And so like I don't consider things that I throw into the compost to, be waste because it's going back to the earth. And same thing with
Yeah.
recycling. It's being repurposed, right? So my definition of low waste is just it's essentially zero waste. It's just less waste. Like I
Yeah.
want to make as little waste as possible. I would love to be the jar person. I just don't think it's like, yeah, accessible for everybody. And I'm fascinated by waste. I think it's just something it's kind of like a taboo in our culture and like Western culture overall to just not talk about waste, but I think it's so fascinating and it's something that's really impacting human health. Like I
Yeah.
think that oftentimes, not to get into the weeds, but a lot of people think, oh, environment, like what's the deal? Why do you care so much about the environment? I get that a lot, actually.
Yeah.
I'll be at like events where it's like less sustainable people, but I'm doing composting or something for the event, and they're like, "Why do you care about or like you really care about the environment?" And it's like, "Yeah, I live here. Like I know you get that, but it's like
It's
I
so
live
true.
here.
Like, why wouldn't I?
It's like I love breathing clean air and drinking clean water. I don't know why this is controversial. But so it's like things like that. It's like thinking about our waste and how that waste is impacting us down the line because you might just think, oh, I'm throwing it into the trash can, but I mean, in reality, it's going back into the environment and it's impacting us later on. So for me, low waste is just trying to minimize my waste as much as possible and trying to think ahead so I don't end up in those situations where I have to buy something or use single-use plastic. Of course, we do it imperfectly. That's my ultimate message is that sometimes there's no avoiding it. But the key is that when I can avoid it, I try my best.
Yeah, and I think also what you said there is really important because, as I said, I consider myself to be zero waste. I like this term. But when I'm traveling, that's not possible. You can't be zero waste when you travel, I think, anyway. So obviously we're going to come and get onto this, but I think it's really important to not strive for this perfection, whatever you want to call it, like whether you're like, I'm low waste, I'm zero waste, I'm trying to have less waste. And I do think all humans, like regardless of how much they want to produce, like should be thinking about this, like what, because there's no away. Things don't just go away. It goes somewhere.
Absolutely. And like I said, it's impacting our health. Like it's not only is it just going somewhere and taking up land or getting burned and put into the atmosphere and, into our lungs essentially. It's going into our waterways, into the ocean, and we already know there's a huge plastic problem in
Yeah.
our all over the world. So it's just being mindful. And like you said, traveling is one of the hardest times to be zero waste, in my
Yeah.
opinion. Something I struggle with is like water bottles when traveling. Like I try my hardest. I always have my reusable water bottle like at all times, but it's not always possible to have clean, safe drinking water um off the tap or something accessible.
Mhm.
So that's something I try to be really careful about. Like even though it's not something that I can always avoid, you need to be hydrated. It's essential to human life.
Yeah.
But I try to really minimize that.
Yeah, I think we have a big problem within the sustainability community. Like, not to harp on about perfectionism, but I think we have a big problem where people might think that they're open-minded to not being perfect, but they so badly don't want to be seen as imperfect that they kind of hold themselves back in a way and can come off unintentionally judgmental, which I think is really off-putting to anybody who might be interested in getting involved. And maybe like I'm even guilty of this myself, I don't know, but like I had the same thing as you when you were saying like you go to these conferences and people say like, why do you care? And I used to work in a private jet company. I've said that a few times on here. Yeah, the shock factor, right? But I used to work for a private jet company when I was in travel, and I would get that reaction. Like people would be like, "Oh, the environment, like really?" And I used to say, yeah, I mean, I know I work for this company, but like it's still like a big part of who we are. Like, and I like obviously didn't sell the private jets. I was just
Right.
selling travel. Um, but it was very hard in that culture for people to understand why you would care, when kind of the company was not about that at all.
Yeah, it's fascinating because they think, okay, you're part of the, private jet or travel industry, you should not focus on that, maybe because it's bad for business or whatever.
Mm,
But to me, it's like that's a great opportunity to just infuse a little bit. A little bit is better than nothing. And I think you share that sentiment like that we need to just try the best we can. And I think
mm,
we can still enjoy things like traveling, especially because it opens our minds to other cultures and other ways of living that we could find more sustainable habits even.
yeah,
So I just think that it's fascinating that we as humans are like that. We're very black and white, It's
yeah,
like, oh, well, you work in this industry, so you must think this. And it's like, no, it's like you have the opportunity to infuse what you love into any industry. And that's what I love about sustainability. Like I mentioned before, you can really put it into anything, even the most, polluting industries you can.
yeah. And definitely the most polluting. And to be clear on the podcast, I do not endorse private jets. But it is, yeah, it's totally true. Like just because I worked in the travel sector of that company doesn't mean that I'm like against sustainability. And even when I talk about sustainable travel, the comment I get most is travel is inherently unsustainable. People just flat out put it out to me. And I think it comes down to the flying.
Yeah.
But it's really reductive. It doesn't consider the industry as a whole. And like you said, it kind of gives people an out. Like
Mhm.
if they believe, oh, well, this industry is unsustainable, then they won't try and be more sustainable when they're traveling because they're always going to travel.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I just think that's such a cop out. That's such an easy thing to just be like, oh, well, it doesn't matter anymore because I'm already being so unsustainable by traveling. Like,
Yeah.
no, you could travel lighter. You could be mindful of your plastic usage. You could support organizations that are doing good things in the place that you're traveling as far as the environment goes. I just think there's so many opportunities to infuse it. And I love that part about what you do because it's really highlighting how important it is to be sustainable at
Yeah.
the times where it's kind of harder. Um,
Yeah.
and I will never forget what I don't post too much about sustainable travel, even though I love to travel. Um, I just I remember one time I think it was a year ago I posted about traveling sustainably and I took the train to the airport rather than an Uber or car type of thing and somebody had commented um they basically were like a travel company on an island doing charters and things like that and they were like travel is inherently unsustainable, like you mentioned. And they said, it doesn't matter what you do, what you like, it's going to pollute the environment. And I'm like, so you don't spend time with your guests explaining to them how to not pollute the ocean while you're giving them a charter on a boat? Like, I don't know. To me, it's like that's a huge opportunity to educate the travelers. And just because they took a plane to get to you, there's really no other way until there is a different way, we're going to use plane travel. And I think there's even an opportunity for airlines to become more sustainable. It's just that we can only do so much as individuals, but we can still do something.
Yeah, no, really good point. And I think it boils down to the fact that it is a cop out. Like if you believe that there is nothing you can do, you will do nothing. And that's just not a good way to be. Um, so I think we've kind of covered a little bit of this anyway, but when we're talking about like zero waste living and low waste living, like to you, what like let's put travel aside for 1 second. What makes
Yeah.
that kind of so important? Like why should people be I guess trying to reduce their waste at all.
Yeah, I was thinking about that recently because I was like, why do I care so much about waste? And I think it's because I am just one human on this planet of, 8 billion people and over, lifetimes. I'm just one human. Why? I don't want my existence to create such a negative impact.
Yeah.
I think that's what it boils down to for me, at least. I want to leave this world knowing that I did everything in my power to bring positive, I don't know, change and push back against the systems that be, because I think that's often what it is like we don't want to push back against the status quo. Well, like you mentioned about being competitive, I love being a rebel. So I love being pushing back and questioning why are we doing it this way? Especially when there's such negative impacts. And honestly, I just have such a reverence and adoration for nature that I just want other people to experience it like I have. And it's just it's a shame that like the future generations will not experience it as we have.
Mhm.
And I guess it just boils down to, yeah, I don't want to make a negative impact on the environment by just existing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's like really impactful as well. And even when you think about littering, I think people have this belief that like people wander through areas and just drop litter. And I'm like, that's actually quite rare. Like litter comes from our waste bins, like our rubbish, like the fact that we like have those on the street is great because like the litter can go in there, but at the same time, like then there's wind, like it comes through and it takes this litter and like it's like some kind of misconception that people are just going through like spreading like trash like confetti. Like it's not it's not at all what happens, you know?
I'm so glad you brought this up because it's something that happens, like it's a conversation that keeps getting brought up in my town. I live in a coastal city
Yeah.
and, frequently go to the beach to pick up some trash just while I'm walking and things like that. And people will say things like, "Oh, it's a shame that people left this trash." I'm like, "No, they didn't leave this trash. Most of this trash is brought in from the ocean. It was from somewhere else. It could be nearby, but it also could be far away. We don't really know." I don't think that's the issue. The issue is that we have all these, first of all, the issue is that we haven't hold these corporations accountable. So we've put a lot of the burden on the consumer, like the individuals that, but then also we don't, like you mentioned, we don't have like a great system for
Yeah.
managing our waste. And so like the wind or the ocean takes it, we, that the only way to avoid all this is, like you mentioned, zero waste, right?
Yeah. To just stop wasting because, and also it can come from, like, we talk about infrastructure, like, even though our infrastructure is not that great for getting rid of waste, like, there are other places in the world that are not the US and the UK that literally don't have infrastructure. And maybe they burn waste, maybe they just kind of dump waste. And maybe we're also part of that problem because we send our waste to other places and then it comes back to us. Like we don't have a perfect solution whatsoever. And all the waste around the world is all of our waste. You know, we're all in this together. It doesn't matter who put it there. It's about all of us working together trying to get rid of that.
Absolutely. And stop creating in the first place.
Hmm. Yeah, I really, really think so. But when we talk about this like zero waste and we're saying how it's a very frightening concept, I think people don't know where to start. I think it's overwhelming, and I think they hear. I think you're right. I think they hear this term zero waste, and they're like, "Well, I'm not going to get there. I'm not going to be able to do that. Like it's too hard." So, What tips would you give someone who's just like, I just want to give it a go. I want to dip my feet in the water, so to speak.
Oh, first of all, I'd be like, thank you so much for being interested. But then second of all, I would say just start being mindful. I don't think you actually have to do anything to begin. I think you first need to start just being like present
Mhm,
with at the grocery store or when you're buying a gift or anything, just being like, what is this packaging that it's coming in? I saw a stat the other day that it was like 50% of all the waste in the world is packaging. So I think if we could just start there, like that would be tremendous. And like just being aware, like, is there an option to buy something more sustainable? Like maybe it's in aluminum or glass rather than plastic. Because we need to remember that plastic is a fossil fuel. Like it is made from fossil fuels.
mhm,
So by buying plastic, we are contributing to the fossil fuel industry.
mhm,
So just being mindful and educating ourselves, like if you just know that fact that plastic is petroleum based, I think that is huge and something that we don't really think about often.
mhm,
Um, so being aware first, and then second of all, looking for ways or like the items that you use the most. That's
mhm.
what I would think about because like for me, for instance, I'm a huge water drinker. I drink lots of water. I'm one of those, I live in Florida. It's really hot here. So it's something I need to be drinking all the time. I know people, I've convinced people who were buying cases of plastic water bottles to go to a filter system. Um,
Mhm.
be because that's just not sustainable, right? So it's things like that. What do you buy most often? And like, what do you use most often? Um, I think, looking for the plastic sources is the most important to start. But
Mhm.
then, like, even for me, I don't buy as much plastic. I mean, I still buy plastic, of course, in some cases, but I would say my use has gone down tremendously. But then even looking at things like toilet paper and like paper products, because that can be a source of waste. And, even plastic, the toilet paper and all that stuff could be wrapped in plastic. So it's just being mindful of those things and thinking about what's going to happen once I'm done with this.
Yeah. Yeah. Plastic, I think I know you're very passionate about plastic, and I think that's like something that I initially was like super focused on, and I was like, oh, I just want to get rid of it all. Um, less so now, I think, like with hard plastic, I will like, because it can be recycled. But my major issue with soft plastic is that it's used, it's then done. Like there's
Yeah.
nothing you can do with it. Whereas you mentioned aluminium, glass, both can be endlessly recycled. So really those products, they're not as much of an issue in the environment.
Yeah, I will say that in the US at least, like it is still hard to recycle a lot of the plastics and even some like harder plastics, you would think, oh, this is recyclable. It's not, unfortunately. And like even like you have to think about even if it has residues and things like that, there's a
Yeah.
chance that it can't be recycled. So I just try to avoid it altogether. And lately I've realized I've been really watching my waste and noticing that a lot of my waste is thin plastics because I'm opting for less bulky things and things
Yeah.
that are thinner, right? But like you said, there's really no system for recycling that type of material. So I mean, this is not a new concept, but I have started employing it. Eco
I
bricks.
use them. That's
You
how I'm
do?
zero waste.
Okay, awesome. I was wondering, because it's something that I was like, okay, I know people are doing this, but I wasn't sure why. And
Yeah,
then I
it's
was like, oh
great.
my gosh, I'm using so many thin plastics. I need to stop. Like you mentioned, they get thrown away. I mean, they fly off of whatever, they fly off the landfill from the trash can. It's just an easier material to get lost in our environment. So if we
Yeah.
eco brick, like you mentioned, it'd be a great way to keep that all. And if anyone doesn't know what eco bricking is, it's just having a larger plastic container and then stuffing it with smaller plastics. And
Mhm.
for me, that's a lot of thin plastics. And I've been loving it. Just
Yeah.
knowing that it won't end up in the environment is really satisfying.
So we collect like plastic, but I'm such an eco nerd. And like this is quite a big thing for me to admit on this podcast. People have probably not heard me talk about the environment this much. But we collect like plastic bottles that have been like littered near us, and we stuff them with thin plastics and we use them like bricks. So we're making like a garden table and chairs out of them.
Oh, that is next level. I love that.
Oh my God, it's so fun. But it's taken us like quite a lot of years to obviously get because we genuinely don't buy that much plastic. So like to kind of get to this level, and I'm sure you'll be the same, like it does take quite a few years to have collected them. And we're now like thinking like, yeah, what can we make with these bricks that we have?
That's so exciting.
It's very nerdy. So obviously we've talked about kind of like why it matters, what it means, and like how people can do it. But we did say at the beginning that zero waste and low waste is really hard when you're traveling. Why do you think that is?
I think it's a combination of things. Like you mentioned earlier, infrastructure. When you're traveling to, when you're traveling to another country, you might not always know what their infrastructure is like or what's available there. And I think the easier thing and most available thing is usually like plastic. And when I'm thinking waste, that's like the first thing I'm thinking about. So I think that's just like the easier thing. And when you're traveling, you're limited on time, so you're not really looking to find the most sustainable option most of the time, I think. We're just trying to get to the next thing. And usually it's, for me, I keep it bringing it back to the water bottles just because that's
Yeah,
such an essential thing that I
they're
notice that
so
I buy.
important.
Yeah, and it's something I notice I buy when I'm traveling, and it's something I don't buy when I'm home. So, and that's another thing is like the routine of being home. It's so easy to get into your routine and not need that plastic because you've thought of all the different ways where, oh, I can bring my water bottle, I can do this, or I'll have water when I get to this place,
Hmm.
or I can bring out my takeout container. And there are ways we can be more sustainable when we travel, like we mentioned, but it's just that it's harder
Hmm.
when we aren't sure of what we're stepping into, I guess.
Yeah, and I think the infrastructure point is a really good one. Like sometimes when you're in a different country, they might actually have really good infrastructure, but because you're not familiar with it, like you don't necessarily know like, oh, this is where I need to recycle things. Like I'm sure we've all been to those places where like you maybe don't speak the language and you have this array of multicolored bins in front of you and you're like, where do I start, you know?
Yeah,
Um,
that's a good point.
yeah, and I think, and as well, like obviously when we're at home, we can have a composter, but you can't exactly carry around like a tiny little composter when you're traveling, as funny as it be. And like it's difficult because you're on the go a lot. You might be eating, like you need to grab a snack, and most snacks are wrapped in plastic or packaging of some kind. So yeah, I think it's really hard, and I think when people do travel, sustainability may not be the first thing on their mind because they're kind of like I just, I'm in unfamiliar territory. Like, it doesn't matter right now.
Yeah. And even when I do travel, it is on my mind, but it sometimes feels like it's just harder. Like you mentioned, I might not know. And sometimes the locals don't know, but sometimes they do. I went to Aruba a couple years ago, and I was pleasantly surprised when they told me that Aruba is known for it's like the second best in the world in terms of water, like tap water. Uh,
Yeah.
Right? And I just thought that was so amazing. And I was so glad that the host shared that with us and was so, that was such a selling point for me. I was like, wow, I don't, especially being on an island, you want to be extremely mindful
Yeah.
when you're in a place with limited resources already. So I just think that maybe it's that bridging of the, locals with the tourists. And I know
Mm.
you talk about that so often. So
Yeah.
how we can be more involved with the locals rather than just being tourists.
Yeah, because locals so often like have that knowledge that we lack, but we kind of go in a bit arrogant as travelers and we're like, oh, well, like, yeah, I know what I'm doing. Like, I'm from the UK, I'm from the US. Like, we have no idea. It's very funny.
Yeah.
Um,
Or we just assume that they don't have it and just because it's like not our countries, right? And
yeah.
it's like, no, they might have even better options than we have.
Yeah, they often do, like, especially traveling in Europe. Like Germany, for example, has fantastic recycling and like waste disposal facilities, and so do the Scandinavian countries. And really, when we look at what we're doing in the UK, it's quite pathetic. You made me laugh when you talk about the tap water because we had Ariane on this podcast, Ariane Gara, and I know
Yeah.
you've collaborated with her before, and there was one of the first things that she had to say about Aruba. She's like, we have really good tap water, and she's like, so if you come here, like, don't buy plastic. And I just thought that was so funny, like a point of pride with Arubans. They're like, no, no tap water. I mean, no
Yeah,
bottled water.
it should be, it's such a beautiful thing and something that, yeah, a lot of tourists are going to use. So I just love that she's also passionate, of course, about it.
Yeah, she said she was going around telling tourists like, "Oh, did you know that you can drink our tap water?" And I was like, "That's perfect, honestly."
Oh, that's a great service.
So, like, with regard to travel, are there ways, do you think, that we can make it either easier for people or that they could maybe just do themselves that would help when they're traveling to be more sustainable?
Yeah, I think the first step would be packing lighter and packing, for the environment you're visiting. I think it's sometimes that we are like, oh, we're unsure, but we could do a little bit of research to figure out what we really need to bring, as opposed to just bringing a whole lot of everything, like a little bit of everything, and then, jamming it into a giant bag.
Hmm.
That's something I've definitely worked on, just traveling lighter, because that the more weight you put on a plane is will take more emissions, right? So
Hmm.
it's just starting there, and starting with what you're packing, like using concentrates. I love to use like bar sh soap, conditioner, shampoo, um, toothpaste tablets, all these things that I've swapped over time, and slowly, it was never something that like I used what I had, and then when it was time for a new shampoo bottle, I went instead from a bottle to the bar soap that was years ago. But it's just something that you can do slowly. And the best part is that I don't have to have like a travel set of like toiletries or and like a home set of toiletries, I
Hmm.
really just use the same stuff at home and travel. And I just, it just packs well. And I kind of like it because it's like the full size of everything. So if I'm going on like a longer trip, I don't have to worry of like running out or things like that. So I think that's a good place to start. And then ultimately, I think we could all do better about doing the research before we get there. Like I didn't know about Aruba's water situation until I got there, but thankfully I didn't buy any plastic bottles. I had my reusable water bottle with me, so that was, great to have. But I just think that we could be more mindful of what the practices are there. And I think that's why it's great to have creators like you who really highlight these places and tell us like a little bit more information that we wouldn't like. It's not generally, talked about information. And I just think that it's so amazing. Like we need people like you that tell us like, oh, at this place, there'll be composting, so you can utilize those services and things like that.
Thank you. Well, I didn't bring you on this podcast to flatter me, but don't stop, you know. It's I think it's one of those things where like research is even people who really pride themselves on research, you wouldn't have this list of like, okay, let me look up like what are the recycling facilities? Like, can I drink the water? Can I compost? Like this is just isn't things that even I or like the people I know who are the most organized, we wouldn't look these things up. So
Yeah.
I think that is important, but also sometimes a little bit difficult because it's like, what do you like? Where's this magic list of like everything I
Yeah.
need to find out before I travel?
It is hard. I mean, I will say I do look up yeah, the water, like the potability of water, but
Hmm.
that's as far as I've ever gone, I guess, into figuring it out. But like I said, creators like you provide that shortcut. And I think that's like, when you find somebody who you feel like explains things well and does their research, and you provide the sources, I think it's great to just utilize social media for what it is and keep it social and informative. Save those posts for later and ask questions. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
the
not a
question's vital. Like when you arrive, I think
yeah.
ask and also I think we need to take every destination or every place like as its own individual thing. Like when you arrive in, say, Aruba, like you might get there and be like, oh wow, like the water is clearly drinkable. There's like signs everywhere. People have told me blah blah blah, but I can't see anywhere to recycle maybe. So then it's like assess the situation one by one and think about like just have like you said, have your waste in your mind. Like be mindful of it and be like, what am I wasting here? Maybe even take day one and be like, where am I going wrong here? And then ask your questions and kind of get a feel for it.
Yeah, yeah, and don't be afraid to ask the locals, right? I love talking to the locals and just being like, "So, how do you guys manage waste, or how do you do this?" And I ask often about composting. Like, do you have an infrastructure for that, or even if you just do it at home, things like that. I think that's the most fun way because they're always so excited to share what they're doing. And
Yeah.
they may not categorize it as like sustainability. To them, it's just like life.
Mm.
But they're doing it, and it's a point of connection. So I just think it's a fun way to bridge that gap.
Yeah, and actually that kind of brings me to thinking about another thing which I really like to do that I think has just become like a part of my travels but isn't like conscious, I guess, is like I always find myself kind of seeking out these indigenous owned places or like indigenous like not necessarily experiences, but like indigenous owned cafes or like maybe indigenous owned eco hotels or something like that, because a lot of the times indigenous practices are very sustainable by nature, even though they don't necessarily consider themselves as such. So rather than looking for like big fancy eco hotels, I might go for something a bit more like that. And I think you often do learn a lot.
Yeah, oh my gosh. There's so much we can learn from indigenous cultures. And that's often like my favorite part of a trip if like I have the ability to, interact with like indigenous tribe or people from the indigenous community. I just feel like that's so fulfilling and it's always like leaves an impression on me,
Yeah,
especially about the people in that area. And I think that's like the most wholesome way we can,
we
yeah, and
need
like you
to
said,
learn.
yeah,
Yeah,
and they're the stewards of the lands first,
yeah.
right? So we
People
can
who
learn a lot.
carry on indigenous practices, like not necessarily like because I know it's not necessarily all indigenous people who would do these things, but people who carry on indigenous practices, like they are really important people in the world, I think. Like keeping these kind of traditions alive is something that everybody in the world could stand to learn a little something from, you know?
Absolutely. And I think it would be really enriching if we all just took that step. I think, like you said, just the practices, it doesn't even, ideally it's indigenous people, but I think it's even better that more people are adopting those practices.
Yeah, yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, I think as well, one of the things that can be helpful when it comes to like zero waste is making sure that you have the stuff in place. So like you mentioned water bottles a few times. I use like a filtered water bottle. So kind of everywhere I go, I'm like, okay, I have that safety net, you know, like it's apparently good enough that you can drink like airport bathroom water with it. So I trust it for most things and I've never gotten sick. But that's a great way as well, like kind of having tools where they apply to lots of places. You can use that too, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I need to get one actually. I've been doing some research on like a filtered one.
Yeah,
But yeah, I think that's definitely
the game
brilliant.
changer.
Yeah, and even if you can't do that, I would say like there are levels. Like instead of buying individual water bottles, why not buy those bigger like gallons or I don't know, just like a bigger liter or something like that. That would inherently use less plastic. You're just buying a bigger quantity instead of buying all the individual pieces of plastic, I guess.
Yeah, and I love that you do this. I love that you always think about ways to kind of help the person who's not maybe there when it comes to sustainability, because this is something that like it is important, and it's more important than the people who are all the way there and are like, or not even all the way there, but the people who kind of have it figured out somewhat and like can think ahead to be like, okay, I need a filtered water bottle. Like the majority of the population ultimately is not doing this, and that's okay if they just have that little bit of mindfulness and they're like, right, should I instead buy a bigger water bottle? Should I instead like I don't know, try and find a filter if I've got my reusable bottle with me, like something like that. It's a good step.
Absolutely. And I think that's what we need to consider when we talk about sustainability is that it's not black and white. And I think, you and I know that, but I think the people who are less involved with sustainability see it as black and white. There are levels to this. I think that it's like stepping stones until you get to that most sustainable level of using the filtered water bottle exclusively. We can ultimately buy the bigger bottle. We can,
Mm,
there's so many options and I think that it just varies depending on what exactly you're talking about but you
yeah.
can still buy plastic it's just that you have to be mindful about it and also do your best to dispose of it properly.
I kind of love this topic though, because when I first started getting into sustainability, and I think most people who have an interest in sustainability have gone through this phase, when I would see my family or friends buying plastic in particular, that was a big one for me, or doing things that I was like, well, I'm now doing this. I'd kind of get this bee in my bonnet and like I'm so gobby, you know, I'd be like, well, why don't you actually do this? And it was really off-putting for like my family and friends because they were kind of like, can you like stop judging us? And for me, like I always like to say that I'm judgment free when I talk about sustainability. But actually, that's taken me quite a long time to get to the point where I don't sound like I'm judging because even then, like I wasn't judging. I was trying to share my knowledge and be like, this is something I'm super passionate about, but it did just come off like really, really the wrong way. And
Yeah.
it's too intense for them.
Yeah, and I think you were just probably offering an alternative or a different way of thinking, and then it feels shameful maybe to them. They
Yeah.
maybe receive it that way, even though you didn't intend to. And honestly, I've been there too. And so even with like people I know that are a bit more sensitive, and even just in general, this is what I do nowadays. I don't tell anybody anything. And I know that sounds crazy, but like all the people in my life know how involved I am with sustainability. They know it's something I'm passionate about. So I think it would be just too annoying for me to just constantly bring it up. So oftentimes what happens actually is like with my in-laws, for instance, um, like something will happen and they'll look at me and say, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to like use a plastic bag. And I'm like, oh,
Sweet.
I know. And I'm like, oh my gosh. I was like, you don't have to be sorry, but I'm so glad you're thinking about it. That's the only
Yeah.
thing I really care about. And what I do is just model the behavior. So I model it by showing what I do online, by modeling it by bringing my compost bin to my in-laws, things like that. Yeah, I do those kinds of
I
things.
love that.
And yeah, I think that's the best way to show people that you care and to show that you care about them
Mm.
because I think ultimately people don't want to be preached at. And we can be
No.
so passionate that we're not trying to preach. We're just like trying to share this information. But it comes off so differently than we intended to. So I
Yeah.
think the best way is just to show it in our lives and then people kind of see how much like I try to show the fun part of sustainability.
Yeah.
Like it's actually so much fun and not reductive, but it's actually expansive and liberating to not depend on plastic or I don't know, wasteful things, but to like, appreciate nature more and to release our hold on like consumerism. I think that it's so much more fun to live that way. And I just try to show people that it is expansive rather than feeling like, oh, I was on a panel the other day where somebody was like, oh, how do you deal with the discomfort of sustainability? And I was like, I don't actually
What?
like, well, people transition. I guess what they were
Oh,
asking
yeah,
is like,
yeah. I see.
how do you help people like that might feel uncomfortable as they transition into a more sustainable lifestyle? And I said, well, I don't really see it as discomfort. I think that we need to change our mindset around it and kind of just see it as like, oh, it's a fun game. I kind of like you mentioned about being competitive earlier. I'm kind of competitive in that way of like, how can I make it fun and make it like a problem solving creative endeavor like oh I don't have or like I've been thinking about before I was making my own bread. Nowadays I've been making my own bread, but before that I was buying it and I was like thinking about the plastic that it came in and I was like how can I just prevent that from happening.
Mm-hmm.
um, and I'm like, oh well, I can make bread and I can make this and I can make that, and like it's become a fun thing that I've incorporated into my life now instead of feeling like, oh, I can't buy bread and this is scary and I don't know. It's a
Yeah.
mind.
No, you're so right. There's like a level, like, let me share something that's going to make me sound like an absolute nerd, but I'm going to try.
I love
So it's actually your post. So, remember the other day you were talking about like how the thin lining on like those washing tabs and stuff doesn't really dissolve properly. And I've been thinking about my washing for a while, and like, because I was using Small, who are in the UK, like a sustainable brand. But I was like, I wonder, because they have that plastic, but they market themselves as like super sustainable. So I was like, hmm. So anyway, I read up on them and they very candidly were like, we're not the most sustainable brand. We're basically like doing what we can to reduce chemicals in the water stream, but like blah, blah, blah. And I was like, okay, well, I would like to be a little bit more sustainable than that because I don't feel like I'm at the kind of bridging point anymore. I think I can do it. So I was researching like all these options and like eco eggs and like natural methods and stuff. And actually, we've settled on a natural one that's working like really great for us. But it's that's it for me. Is like the kind of can I go more sustainable? Can I go more? And I think people look at that and they're like, well, that's just sad. Like, why are you, spending so much time on that? But for me, I'm like, I genuinely enjoy it, and I like to see how I can work my way around the problem.
I so agree with you. I try to find ways like, yeah, I love doing that little bit of research. And first of all, I love how candid they were about it. That's so refreshing to me. And I just
Yeah.
wish that's the approach that most companies took. Like, hey, we're trying. It's not perfect, but we're trying. And
Yeah.
yeah, that's a much better option than buying a big jug of whatever, of liquid detergent. But like, we just have to be aware that we can't think, oh, this is the most sustainable option available, when it's
The
not.
end.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, so I just love that they were so forward and transparent about that. So to me, that's the type of business I would want to support, even if it's not the perfectly sustainable option.
Yeah.
Um, but I love that there are options and we can do that research to like, yeah, push ourselves a little bit. I love that too. Like the toilet paper thing is a great example because I use like, paper, I was buying a toilet paper thing that was wrapped in paper, so there was no plastic involved, and it's supposed to be like recycled, so much percentage of it was recycled. But I was like, it's still trees being cut down. What's a better option? And I've landed on bamboo and I've been trying different brands and things like that. But it's just like that. It's exciting. Like I have to use these things anyway, so why not just try different products, different brands, and see who also has like a great message and
Mm.
who are doing other things besides just creating the product. They're also donating to environmental causes and things like that. I just think that it's like you said, it's fun and it might be nerdy, but I think people like us can also help cut down all that research and guesswork, and we can just share what we're doing, which kind of helps the people who don't really want to do the research.
Yeah, and like let's say as well that there are people who would stop at the middle step, and that's fine. If you've gotten like to that point and you're like, okay, I feel like I'm being as sustainable as I can be, this is me, that's okay. Like for
Yeah.
us, like if we want to go a bit further, that's us. I think this brings us quite nicely onto kind of the last topic we're going to talk about, which is a bit of a shift in gears, which I also know that you're really passionate about, is these companies like Amazon, big companies, especially in the US, who are not really doing the right thing. And I know that you're kind of big on putting your money into small businesses as well. So can you tell us a little bit about that, why you do that and why that matters?
Yeah, where do I start? I love the topic of shopping small. Mostly I will say because I have a personal attachment since I grew up in a small business. That was my parents' sole form of income. And, I grew up in a family of five, so I have two younger sisters. So that's kind of a big family. And I just saw the struggles that small businesses go through, and I appreciate the extra work that small businesses often take. Not always. I can't say they're always a more sustainable option, but I do think that not contributing to large corporations that are contributing to all this destruction is better. So like I think shopping small in just about any situation is better than supporting a large business that does not have the environment in mind and their sole focus is their bottom line. That's the number one thing is that if there was like I want to support ethical businesses as much as possible, and I think the best way to do that is smaller batches, smaller quantities, everything just smaller. And I actively monitor what brands I use. So, like a lot of what happens, I'm not sure about the UK, but in the US, like a smaller brand will get big and then it'll get bought out by a giant like Unilever or something like that.
Mhm.
And when that happens, I ultimately stop supporting the business for a lot of reasons. But one of the main reasons is that the quality often goes down.
Yeah.
Like the reason why I was shopping with this brand was because I enjoyed the quality and the extra care that they put into their products.
Hmm.
And ultimately, when they sell to a bigger company, the whole goal, like I mentioned before, is the bottom line. So they're trying to make the product cheaper. They're trying to, make less of it, like, put it in a smaller packaging, but sell it for the same or more cost. And I just think that why do I want to support that when there are small businesses out there, putting the time and care into it, and I could support them directly. That money is going directly into the community or that family. And I really try to shop local as much as possible, but even if I can't shop local, I just try to shop small. And that automatically less reduces your footprint just because there's less steps in the process. It's going directly from the shop owner's facility to your house. And I think that instead of having it go to a warehouse and then the warehouse is packaged and then it's going to another hub and then it's going to this and it's just like we can just find ways to reduce our emissions by just shopping small.
Yeah.
And And I want to support, like, ultimately, these larger corporations are investing in things like fossil fuels and things that I don't believe in. So why do I want to keep supporting that? There's just, I could go on and on about how, like, these large corporations do not have our interests as consumers in mind. So I just think that I want to support someone more directly and support their dream, right? These people are going out on a limb to start something that might not work, and I'd rather support them than support somebody who's already making billions of dollars.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, it's about the money for me. Like when you look at a business like Unilever, like Amazon, they do not need you to support them. And at the end of the day, when you do, you're just paying billionaires. Why are you
Yeah.
doing that? Like it doesn't make sense to me. You're like, yes. It doesn't make sense to me. And I think that any business that is small, contained within, and like community is really important. We can talk about that as well. But like when you're supporting a business like that, ultimately their footprint will be lighter for like numerous reasons than a business that is making billions because you don't make billions without being selfish or even millions. Like there's a level to this.
Yes.
Um, yeah.
And there's some kind of exploitation happening when there's, such a large profit margin. Like
Mhm.
they, I think that like the it just goes on and on because like Amazon, for instance, they don't treat their employees well. They don't allow for unions and things like that. Like I just think that why do I want to support these practices of like, and a lot of people are like, well, you're boycotting, for instance, in the US, we're boycotting Target, and a lot of people are like, well, you're taking away the jobs from the people that are working at Target. And I feel like, yeah, that's awful. I agree with you. But I think that also the corporations are not treating the employees well to begin with. So I
Mhm.
don't think, like that person needs to stay in a business. I mean, obviously, there's a privileged take that I'm coming from because I don't work at Target. But like, I can understand the argument, but I also understand that these corporations don't have our best interests at heart. And ultimately, I don't think they deserve our money, to be quite honest. And I would rather vote
Yeah.
with my dollar. And there's so much purchasing power that we have. And especially like, I just want to mention as women, we support the economy mostly. We are the ones buying most of the household products, buying most of the things. And I just think that it's it's important to be discerning with your dollar and discerning about where you put that money.
Your money is your vote at the end of the day. Like where you put your money is where you are like deciding to place your support. So, for example, if you go to Amazon and you're like, right, and I'm mentioning Amazon a lot, like I'm not an Amazon hater necessarily, but like I don't use them, for my own stuff, so we'll use them. Um, if you go to Amazon and you're like, right, I'm gonna buy this like product, whatever it is, your money, you're literally taking it from a small business owner on like Etsy, let's say, and deciding to put it into Amazon. And that ultimately just lines the pocket of Amazon. It probably does exploit the workers. And if you put it into Etsy, maybe they could employ somebody who was previously employed by Amazon. Like it's
Right.
not a direct correlation, but it does work.
Yeah, and that's the thing, like we are supporting what we value. And ultimately, I cannot support a business that just wants to grow for the sake of growth. And I want to support a business like there's so many local businesses in my area that donate a portion of the proceeds to a local charity or the money that go like that they earn goes directly into the community. It's
Mhm.
making their storefront better. It's making the community richer. So I just think that why when there's so many options, especially with the internet nowadays, like I don't necessarily have to go into the shop. I mean, that's the best thing you can do, but if you can't, I would say the next best thing, like we were talking about levels earlier, that would be the next best thing is just supporting a business that might be further away but is small.
Yeah, and I think when it comes to traveling as well, like I'm a huge proponent of supporting small local guest houses over even like the big eco hotels because when you're looking on like booking.com, Expedia, whatnot, if you use those things, like you're searching and you'll search for like sustainability. And I guarantee you, up will come a Hilton, a Marriott. They're not sustainable. They've got these bogus like sustainability certifications. Oh, I could go on and on as well, but they've got these certifications that aren't real.
Yeah.
versus this tiny guest house that has 4 rooms that's like, cooking soup in their kitchen for you, which like that happens. There are people who are so hospitable, even in the UK, I'm sure in the US as well. And we're literally like taking money away from them to put into the pockets of people who have money. Like,
Right.
why?
I totally agree with you. And yeah, it's just like it also makes for a richer experience, right? Like a homestay over like the eco hotel
Yeah,
and the hotels in general can just feel a little cold and, just not you don't feel like you're in that new environment, So I
yeah,
just think it's all part of the experience. And I think like we mentioned before, it's about embracing it rather than feeling like you're being made to feel discomfort.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not, it's like we are obviously huge eco nerds. We'll accept that. But but there is a joy in it in like the kind of finding things that are doing good. Like everybody likes to feel altruistic, and this is a way that you can put your money to something where you're like, yeah, that did do a bit of good.
Absolutely. I always try to find tours and things that are and stays that are more from the locals rather than supporting like a larger company.
Mm,
That money also goes more directly to them because even if the local tour is working with a larger company, they're still getting a portion of the profits. So I
mm.
just think that it's all, again, all comes back to mindfulness and just being aware and that little bit of intention can go a long way.
Yeah, definitely. I think as well, it's just good to kind of wrap that up by saying that you were talking about privilege just before and saying how it's coming from a point of privilege. And like I'm sure you would kind of feel the same way as me on this. Like I do recognize that. I do recognize that like where you choose to spend your money when you're looking at smaller brands can sometimes be more expensive, can sometimes be inaccessible to people in places. And like I don't think it's about doing it 100% of the time, again, like we were saying. It's just about maybe if you can.
Yeah. And I think also opening ourselves to the idea that maybe we can, we just don't think we can.
Mm,
A lot of times people tell me like, oh, well, I can't really shop small because it's more expensive. But I was like, really? Because I buy the same things and it's just I would say it's either less expensive or around the same cost. And so I think it's just also an idea we have in our minds that oh, shopping small or doing X is more expensive. Also heard that sustainability is, that there's that myth that it's expensive to be
yeah,
sustainable. And I disagree because the core of sustainability is buying less. It's doing
yeah.
less, washing less. It's all about less. So if you feel like, oh, I don't really have many options, then just start with less, like reducing what you're purchasing to begin with.
Yeah, that's also the most sustainable way is to be frugal.
Yeah, use
Which
what
is
you have.
great. So, Alexa, then tell us what are you working on at the moment and where can people find you?
Well, I am working on something that's not yet ready, but if you want to be part of that, follow me on YouTube. I'm Go Green with Alexa on Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, Threads. And yeah, I would love to if you follow me, just give me a shout, give me a DM, and I'd love to chat with you and
Yeah,
learn about what you are in your sustainable journey.
can attest that you're a very approachable person on social media, and I really enjoy following you as well. I think you're very good at not preaching and kind of saying to people, here's what I do. Like, no worries if you don't as well, but this is just what I do. And I think that whole like what did you call it earlier? Like not it's not like learn by doing is the opposite. Like help people by
Modeling.
showing. Yeah,
Yeah.
like modeling behaviors, I think is a very apt word for what you do. And it's really good.
Thank you so much. Like that means the world to me.
My pleasure. Well, this has been the Sustainable Travel Podcast. You can find us on Instagram at the Sustainable Travel Podcast, or we're also on my website, which is thattravel.co.uk. If you are listening on Spotify or YouTube, please do not forget to like and subscribe. Thank you so much.
Awesome.